Well, welcome back to our series. This is the sixth part in our series, The 8 Pillars of Enduring Joy. And if you're just joining us, these pillars of joy were identified by two spiritual giants in our world, these worldwide spiritual leaders, Archbishop Desmond Tutu and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. It was over a 5-day conversation that they talked about joy and what are the key points of joy, which became the 8 pillars. And it was recorded then in the Book of Joy. So today's pillar is also something that these two men really embody besides joy, and that is compassion. I love the title of this chapter because I think it says it all. It says, compassion, something we want to become. And that's what we're talking about today. Something we want to become. The embodiment, the emulation, the essence of compassion. Our election has revealed to us the state of our nation in clear terms, that we are nearly divided in our perspectives. So there's work to do here. It's laid out for us pretty clearly. And this big task ahead as Americans is one that is about moving into that vast heartland, if you will, that vast heartland of compassion. And as spiritual citizens, I see it as our duty. This is our duty to heal and to unite and to offer compassion and to ourselves and to one another in the process. When we cultivate compassion, we benefit not only the people that we might be serving with or acting with a sense of care or compassion, but we also benefit ourselves. We all know this from service in general, that as we give, we also receive. In the Bible, there is a Hebrew word for compassion, and it comes from the root word rakim. I probably didn't say that right, but I actually did practice. And it means womb. So the root word of compassion means womb. And we are in this sort of cultivating and nurturing kind of space for the rebirth of a new way of being, a new way of seeing, a new way of moving forward together. And so it is essential for us to really midwife that rebirth, to really hone up on our own quality and understanding and expression of compassion. The chapter on compassion opens with the Dalai Lama saying 2 statements. Well, first he starts rubbing his hands together, like as if we finally got to the heart of it all, right? As that's really his ballywick of all things. Really, compassion is something that the Dalai Lama and the Buddhist monks and the Tibetan tradition really bring forward. And so he says with his 2 statements as he's rubbing his hands together, getting excited about this particular pillar, he says, first of all, that too much self-centered thinking is the source of our suffering, and that a compassionate concern for others' well-being is the source of happiness. So I don't know if you relate to those 2 statements in any way, but we're going to break them down a little bit more and use them as our structure today because I think they really outline the keys for us. And if you haven't yet related to either statement, maybe you will as we speak to them a little bit more. Have you ever found yourself, let's take that first one for example, too much self-centered thinking is the source of our suffering. So I'm wondering if you ever found yourself particularly frustrated or disappointed or agitated because something specific didn't happen for you maybe in the timing that you had hoped. Anybody relate to that? Well, yeah. So maybe, it could be as simple as something like the store was closed and we wanted to go, or we got to the restaurant and our favorite dish wasn't offered today or they were all out, or the package didn't arrive at the time that we wanted it to. I mean, when we really play it out that way, it sounds kind of silly, right? That we would get ourselves all upset about these things. There are some folks that jokingly call this first world suffering. It's out of our privilege that we have these kinds of sufferings, you know. In our household, we call it bougie suffering, after bourgeois suffering. And it really helps when we claim it that way, because then we can laugh at ourselves and take the edge off and come back to center with that broader perspective. So if it's that kind of thing that we're upset about or frustrated about, I know we don't want to waste our energy on those things. And so we can be partners with one another by calling forth that type of suffering and stop it, right? Stop it in its tracks. By naming it, you know, by naming it alone, we really make progress. And then we can turn our feelings around by shifting our perspective. Now, I know that is often easier said than done, but here's a few ways that we can move in that direction. One is to remember that pain in life is pretty much inevitable, but suffering is a choice. And so we will experience real pain and serious situations in a human lifetime, most likely, far beyond the benign examples I just gave you. And so whether it is a small thing or a bigger thing, we can move toward greater ease and let go of the suffering, even though pain may be present. Compassion helps us do that. Compassion helps us ease that, get out of our suffering minds and move into the big heart of the divine. The other thing we can do is think about others in those moments. So, because we tend to get sort of wrapped up in the loops of our own minds and our own stories, which causes the suffering, if instead we very deliberately shift to thinking about someone else, it opens up the floodgates of compassion. It allows us to shift everything and expand. I know when I do that, I feel more relaxed, more open, more expansive, and then being of service suddenly gives me a sense of purpose far better than the spinning around in the mind just was. So that's something that we might consider. And then also just paying attention to our language. We can move from me to we pretty easily when we notice when we're using the terms I, me, mine. And sometimes those are obviously appropriate to be speaking in the first person. But there also are times when we are using those or maybe overusing that language where if we shifted to we and us and ours, there would be a different feeling present for us. I would say it goes from sort of a compressed stress feeling to, again, a kind of expansive feeling, an open feeling, a willingness to sort of look up and out, you know? And as we look up and out, we notice what's going on around us. We get out of the navel gazing and out into the world, you know, and begin to see, you know, everybody's got stuff that they're dealing with. And maybe I could even be of service. Maybe I could even reach out a helping hand. So when we do that, it leads us then into that second statement that the Dalai Lama made for us, which is a compassionate concern for others' well-being is the source of happiness. So we move from that sort of personal, self-centered place of being kind of locked in to the source of suffering into that wide open space of happiness when we have compassionate concern for others' well-being. He said that after observing a woman all night in an overnight flight who was taking care of a baby and a toddler, and he said that her husband was sleeping and she was there all night trying to nurture the children and quiet the children and comfort the children. And he said, you know, it probably takes many years of monastic life to equal the benefits of the spiritual practice of just one sleepless night with a sick child. And I think that's a beautiful offering of truth for us. So many unsung heroes and heroines are parents or caregivers of their own parents or caregivers of someone else, or maybe even working in a helping profession. There's a lot of that kind of caregiving that you may do for several people. And a lot of times we don't stop to really acknowledge that, to bless that. And I want to do that today, to take a moment for you to bless either yourself or someone else who is a caregiver, who gives in this compassionate way, day after day, time after time, in sort of probably unseen ways or unacknowledged ways for the most part. Well, let's acknowledge it. So I want to invite you to just take a moment and breathe into your heart and see who you want to bless. Maybe it's you who most needs the blessing today, or maybe it's somebody you know. So just take a moment to identify, who do I want to bless as a compassionate caregiver? And once you know that, I want to invite you to take a look at the blessing that's up on your screen and just read through it on your own for a minute and to take in the blessing. And now let's speak it. Maybe if you're blessing yourself, you might want to put your hand on your heart. If you're blessing somebody else, maybe your hand's out to send the blessing. You might want to warm them up beforehand. We like to do that. Kind of like the Dalai Lama was when he was entering this topic of compassion. And so let's speak this now together. Thank you for the compassionate heart you bring to the ones you serve. Your love makes a profound difference in at least one life, and therefore in the oneness of life for all. So it is. When you consider caregiving or working in these helping professions, we all know how important self-compassion is. It may sound as if the Dalai Lama doesn't even think that's important because he doesn't even speak to it. These ideas that he presents are devoid of that idea. But it's not that, it's a cultural disconnect. See, Buddhist monks assume, there's a presumption that we have self-compassion, that we already have it. Just like Jesus presumed when he said, love your neighbor as yourself, that we already loved ourselves. But in our fast-driving Western culture that is about kind of hustling for our worth, as Brene Brown would say, we often don't have much self-love and self-compassion and self-care. So in our culture, we need to name it. Now, my hope and thought is that actually is fading a bit during this pandemic, that we're eroding a little bit of that fast-driving culture, and we're learning some new ways of life. But still, I think we need to name it. So, once we are practicing compassion, it's much easier to discern between the things that will really help us and serve us and care for our beings and the things that are just sort of quick fixes that don't have long-lasting benefits. So if you're used to maybe reaching for chocolate or caffeine or something like these quick treats, you might get a little uplift and then you might have a crash after that. But if instead what we reach for, or if in addition what we reach for, are the self-care kinds of things that are spiritual practices, it will have long-lasting effects. It will be something that will have us prepared for really anything in our everyday lives that comes along. When we meditate, when we pray, when we make conscious contact with spirit, with nature, when we spend time with friends, we practice movement or good nutrition, get good rest, all of these basic ideas we all know, right? But we forget. Somehow we forget, or we slip out of the habit, or it seems like it's going to take too much time, or whatever the excuses we may have. But we need that. We need these practices to keep a reservoir filled of compassion and love for ourselves. So we don't have to be also, because I don't want to give the impression that we have to always have this like overflowing or filled up bucket in order to give. In fact, we don't have to be in tip-top shape at all. Sometimes when we are tired and vulnerable, we are actually able to serve at our best because we're open. We're feeling everything and everyone around us. And so it's in that state that sometimes we can be the most effective in giving to one another, in accessing our compassion. So how do you feel? What do you need? How can I help? These are clarion calls of compassion. And you might think, well, they're not the appropriate questions for me to ask somebody else because I'm not feeling particularly strong today. But I would argue with you on that. Some days, and you have to know for yourself and follow your own intuition, of course. But when we ask others if we can help, a lot of times we heal our own pain too in that process. Acts of compassion are for the giver, but they're for the receiver, obviously, but they're also for the giver. And the action itself of compassion is a connecting one. It's a little different than empathy. Empathy is feeling with someone, but compassion is also taking action. And so when we take action in compassion, we might connect ourselves to our own hearts. We certainly connect with spirit and connect with one another. Anthony Hinton, you might know his story. It was told in the book and the movie Just Mercy. He was on death row for 28 years. He was wrongly accused. Justice was so poorly denied him. It was really heartbreaking, and he was himself completely heartbroken. He was so heartbroken that he stopped speaking. He said, "What's the point of talking if nobody believes what you say?" But then something happened. One day he heard a man in the cell next to him crying. And he said something arose in him. He credits his mother who gave him compassion and taught him compassion. And he said he started to feel his heart opening up. And he said to the man next to him, "What's wrong?" And the man said, "I just found out that my mother died." And Anthony said, "Look at it this way. Now you have someone in heaven who can argue your case before God." And then I told him a joke, Anthony said, and he laughed. And he said, "I got my humor back, and I got my voice back." And for the next 26 years on death row, Anthony Hinton brought compassion to that whole unit. He brought compassion to his fellow inmates, and they became much more like a family who cared for one another. And he said that at the end of every day, because he made it his goal to help others solve their problems and to think about other people's problems, that at the end of day after day, he would realize that he had thought so much about other people's problems that he hadn't thought at all about his own. This is exactly what the Dalai Lama is talking about. And he was able to hold on to his joy in one of the most joyless places we could possibly imagine, death row in prison. That's pretty incredible. So are you feeling maybe today that Spirit wants to open up your heart a little bit more? That Spirit wants you to open up your heart maybe to an individual or to a group of people, perhaps? If you're short on ideas, there's half of a nation that's hurting right now. Maybe you could consider one of them. Let's take a moment with a song by Carrie Hillary called "Open Up My Heart."
Gonna open up my heart to the world around me. Share a smile with everyone I see. This is what I believe. What we give, we will receive. Gonna open up my heart. Gonna reach right out when somebody needs me. Listen to what their heart needs to share. Gonna try to understand, do the very best I can. Gonna open up darkest hurtful times, gonna open up my heart. Gonna open up my heart. I can see a world full of abundance. Perfection shines in everything I see. It's time to believe in our prosperity. Time to open up our hearts. Time to open up our hearts. Gonna share a little love with the world around me. I'll do my best to lift somebody up. Share the love I feel inside, something deep I just can't hide. Time to open up my heart. Time to open up my heart. Share the love we feel inside, something deep we just can't hide. Time to open up our hearts. Time to open up our hearts. Time to open up our hearts. Time to open up our hearts.
That was a beautiful song. Hopefully, it helped you open up your heart even more. I know it did me. I was thinking about a friend of mine called a couple days ago, and she was in a lot of distress. And she was telling me how she walks her dog in the neighborhood, and everybody assumes she's really happy about the election. And so all of her neighbors are saying how wonderful it is. And she said she just sort of puts this fake smile on because she doesn't want to deal with it. But she feels really, really lonely in her perspectives. And she said that when she came home, that she was telling her husband about it, and he has different political views than she does. And so she was, she said, I had a temper tantrum essentially. And she said, I was so angry that he would have been completely justified in walking out the door. But she said, instead, he walked toward me and he hugged her and she sobbed. And they have stood by one another through all of this craziness and loved each other and supported each other. I know they've had many heated conversation around politics, and generally they just don't talk about it, but right now, kind of hard not to talk about it. And when my friend was telling me all this, I was just really feeling for her. I don't want her to hurt. And I was asking myself, how can I help? Which is a really great simple question to have, just sort of running in the back of our hearts and minds when we want to help somebody and we want to offer some compassion. I certainly felt empathy for her, but that compassion of what can I do? How can I help? And so it was pretty simple, just listening, maybe offering a few encouraging words. I invited her to our With Malice Toward None program. And we talked about some other people she knew that might be feeling the same way, that maybe could be invited as well, and she would feel a little sense of solidarity. So these simple ways that we can reach out to one another, make a big difference. What about for you? Can you reach out and offer a little grace and compassion to somebody? Of course you can. We all can. We can choose to do that. And whether they are friends or neighbors or even strangers, all of those efforts will lead us to the kind of world we want to create together, a harmonious one, a peaceful one of unity and equality for all of us. I reached out to my sister then, thinking that maybe she was feeling some of the things that my friend was feeling, and offered her a prayer. And she said thanks for the prayer, and she wasn't ready to talk. And so we need to know, too, that some people aren't going to be ready yet, but that's okay, too. This isn't about us. It is about the connection between us. So can we be big enough to hold spiritual space? Yes, of course we can. Can we be big enough to hold it for all of our fellow Americans, our whole human family? I know we can. We can be big enough to hold it, and I believe that we will. So who will you reach out today to offer an olive branch of some sort? Someone with whom maybe you've had some ideological divide or separation with? When you do, whoever that might be that is hurting, your prayers or your words of connection can make a great difference. It goes a long way toward our unity. And we need to remember to drop our defenses. When the conversation then turns to our differences, can we be the bigger person in that conversation and drop our defenses and stay in the space of holding spiritual space? We don't know until we try, but we certainly can do our best with that intention behind us. And let the heated conversations go for now. That's not where we're at. We're at a place to just let it all in. However and wherever we are on the spectrum of our feelings around this, and however we voted, we just need to let it in. Let it all in. Feel our feelings. Allow a little time for some soft landing before we pick up those conversations again. And so one of the things we can do in between is this connection, this compassion. Compassion is contagious. There are some social scientists, researchers, particularly Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler, who suggest that if we are kind and compassionate, that it has a ripple effect of 2 to 3 degrees out. So in other words, what that means is if we are kind and compassionate, our friends are influenced to be kind and compassionate, our friends' friends, and even our friends' friends' friends. So that energetic connection, even if somebody doesn't witness those actions of compassion, when they can feel it energetically or they know about it, they too tend to act with greater kindness and compassion. That's pretty incredible, isn't it? So it is a contagion that we want in our society right now, compassion, and maybe it's the antidote to our pandemic. Let's be that contagious compassion and inspiration for all of us now. Let's build this house of joy, one pillar at a time, from the inside out, and let compassionate hearts lead the way. This week, we're going to focus, I hope, on reaching into our hearts for compassion and reaching out to others with care and with grace. Let's know this, let's say this together, and I hope maybe even make a commitment to do this together. And so, together, let's say it. I reach into my heart for compassion and reach out to others with care and grace. And so it is.